Chapter 1. The Silence Between the Notes. Paris, France, 6 years later. The rain tapped gently against the windows of the rehearsal hall, a soft, rhythmic murmur that barely rose above the muted notes Ariana Meline coaxed from the grand piano. It was a Chopin nocturne, haunting, deliberate, each note suspended in the air like a memory she hadn't yet made peace with. She didn't look up when the door creaked open behind her. She never did. Ariana had learned that sound was safer than sight. Sound couldn't lie to you. It couldn't wear a mask or dress itself in charm. But sight had betrayed her once, 6 years ago, under the glittering lights of Vienna, when love wore the face of Lucerne Revel and betrayal wore the smile of her own sister. That night still echoed in her bones. The footsteps behind her stopped, respectful of the music, of the distance she built with every keystroke. Only when the final note dissolved into silence did she lift her fingers and speak. "You're late." A warm chuckle, male. "You don't miss anything, do you?" "Only when I want to." She turned slowly. Marco stood by the door, soaked to the bone, rainwater clinging to his lashes, camera case slung across his shoulder. He looked exactly as he always did, like he'd just walked out of someone else's tragedy and decided to smile through it. She hated how comfortable she felt around him. "I brought the prints," he said, lifting the case. "The ones from Naples. Leave them on the bench." Marco crossed the room, the soles of his boots squeaking slightly against the polished floors. He set the leather portfolio beside her, then sat down on the far edge of the piano bench, careful not to touch her. He never did. Marco was a man who understood boundaries, not because he feared them, but because he respected scars. "Bad dreams again?" he asked quietly. Ariana didn't answer. Instead, she opened the portfolio and thumbed through the photographs, black and white shots of old Italian streets, a withered hand reaching for grapes in a vineyard, a little girl dancing barefoot in the rain. She paused on one photo. It was of her. From behind, seated at a street piano in Rome, her hair pulled back, her spine impossibly straight. Her hands frozen midair, like she was hesitating between the past and the next note. "You shouldn't have taken this," she said. "I didn't plan to. But you looked like music." Ariana closed the folder. "I stopped believing in romantic metaphors a long time ago." Marco leaned forward slightly. "Not all metaphors lie. Some of them are just waiting for you to be ready." She stood. "I have to go. Rehearsal in 20. Coffee?" Ariana paused, her eyes lingering on the window. The rain had slowed. In the reflection, she saw her own face, older than she remembered, sharper. The girl she used to be, the one who wore white lace and believed promises, was long gone. "No," she said. "But thank you." She left the hall without another word. As she stepped onto the street, her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a schedule update from her agent. Instead, her breath caught. LR1 unread message. She hadn't seen those initials in 6 years. She deleted the number but never forgotten it. Her finger hovered above the screen. "Ariana, I heard you're playing in Vienna next month. I'll be there." That was all it said. No apology. No explanation. Just the ghost of a man who had once loved her ruined her, and now dared to appear again like a song she'd almost erased. Ariana stared at the message until the rain smeared the screen. Then, she turned off the phone. The silence between the notes was where the real story lived. And her story was far from over. Chapter 2. The Echo of Betrayal. Vienna, Austria, 3 weeks later. The hotel windows framed the old city like a still-life painting, rooftops blanketed with snow, cathedral spires slicing into a pewter sky. Vienna had not changed, not really. The streets still whispered history, the air still carried the scent of roasted chestnuts, and something bittersweet Ariana couldn't name. But Ariana had changed. She sat curled in the corner of a velvet armchair, a thick robe draped around her shoulders. Her Steinway sat silent in the center of the suite, black and gleaming, its presence a demand and a comfort all at once. A cup of untouched tea cooled on the table beside her. A rehearsal schedule lay open in her lap. But she wasn't reading. She was staring at the envelope Marco had slid under her door that morning. No note. No sender's name. But she knew the handwriting. Lucerne. Inside, one page creased, unlined, written in the exact same penmanship she had once traced with her fingertips in another life. Ari, I won't ask you to forgive me. I wouldn't dare. But I need to see you. Once. Before you play Schubert at the Konzerthaus. Not after. Not when the applause drowns everything else. I need to look at you in silence. If you agree, come to the place where it all began. L. She crushed the letter in her hand, but her fingers didn't tremble. Not this time. The place where it all began. Ariana knew exactly what he meant. 6 years ago, in a private recital room tucked behind the Musikverein, Lucien Ravel had first heard her play. Back then, she was just a gifted conservatory student, and he, already a rising composer with critics wrapped around his baton, had walked in, leaned against the doorframe, and said, "Play that again, slower. I want to remember what longing sounds like." They had fallen fast. But love, Ariana had learned, was not always made of kindness. Sometimes it was made of ambition, of convenience, of betrayal so sharp it carved new truths into your soul. Lucien hadn't just broken her heart. He had stolen her concerto, sold it under his name, claimed it was his, watched her fall apart in the backlash, called a liar, a fraud, a footnote in his triumph. And worst of all, he'd let her take the blame while the world applauded him. She had disappeared after that, changed her name, moved across continents, rebuilt herself from the ash of that fire. And now he wanted to see her again, to look at her in silence, as if silence could ever undo what he'd done. A soft knock pulled her from the spiral. "Come in," she called. Marco stepped in, a scarf still wrapped around his neck. He held a folded newspaper in one hand, a frown carved deep between his brows. "You're on the front page of Le Monde Musical," he said. "They're calling this concert your rebirth." She shrugged. "Let them." He paused, then nodded toward the piano. "You're avoiding it." "I'm not." "You are. You haven't touched it since the flight." Ariana stood, walked to the Steinway, and lifted the lid. Her fingers hovered above the keys, but she didn't press down. "I saw him," she said quietly. Marco tensed. "Lucien?" She nodded. "At the Musikverein. Yesterday. Just a glimpse. But it was him. Do you want me to handle it?" Her laugh was brittle. "You think this can be handled?" "I think men like him deserve to regret everything. And I know what he did to you." "No," she said, her voice turning cold. "You don't. No one does." She sat at the bench, hands trembling now, just slightly. Then, she began to play. Not Schubert. Not anything classical. A melody of her own. Unfinished. Wounded. Beautiful. Marco watched in silence, the way someone might watch a city rebuild itself after the bomb had fallen. When the last note faded, Ariana stood. "I'm going to see him." Marco frowned. "Are you sure? I need to know why." "Why he did it? Why now?" She turned toward him. "And then I'll decide how this ends." Outside, the bells of St. Stephen's Cathedral tolled noon. Inside, Ariana Meline, no longer the girl who'd once loved Lucien Ravel, prepared to meet the ghost of a life she had buried. But this time, she wasn't the one who would be ruined. Chapter 3. A Symphony of Lies. Vienna, the Musikverein, private recital room. The door creaked open with the same sound Ariana remembered from 6 years ago. A low groan of wood and memory. The air inside was still, like time had been preserved beneath the vaulted ceiling and the gold leaf molding. She stepped into the room alone. No manager, no Marco, no piano bench between her and the ghost of her past. Lucien Ravel was already there. He stood by the window, his back to her, dressed in charcoal gray, tailored, elegant, as if time hadn't dared touch him. His hands were tucked into his coat pockets, but Ariana knew those hands intimately. She remembered how they moved when he composed, how they trembled when he lied. "You came," he said softly, without turning. "Curiosity," she replied. "Not forgiveness." Lucerne finally turned, his expression unreadable. The man in front of her looked older, yes, but not worn. He had thrived. While she had crumbled, disappeared, clawed her way back into existence, he had thrived. "I deserve that," he said. "Probably worse." She took a slow step forward. "Do you even know what you did to me?" "Yes," he whispered. "And I've thought about it every single day." She laughed, bitter, sharp. "Have you?" "While conducting sold-out symphonies. Accepting awards for a piece I wrote in tears." Lucerne's jaw tightened. "I didn't plan it that way. It wasn't meant to happen." "No," Ariana cut him off. "You meant to take the piece. You just didn't expect me to survive it." There was a long silence. Then Lucerne moved toward her, slowly, carefully, as if she might shatter with any sudden motion. "I didn't come here to make excuses," he said. "Only to tell you the truth." She didn't stop him. "Not yet." Lucerne pulled something from his coat. "A flash drive. There's a recording on here. The original session file. Metadata shows the date it was composed. The original notation in your hand." "I never destroyed it." Ariana stared at the object like it might bite. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I'm dying." Silence. Then her voice, cold as winter. "That's a new trick." "I wish it were." He sat on the edge of the piano bench, suddenly looking smaller than she remembered. "Pancreatic. Stage 4. Months. Maybe weeks. I didn't come to ask for redemption, Ariana. Just to give back what I stole before it's too late." Something cracked inside her. Not pity, no. It was disappointment. She had come here prepared to destroy him, to carve revenge into his name, to reclaim her music and burn whatever legacy he'd built on her pain. But now? He was already fading. And that wasn't enough. "I don't want your apologies," she said. "I don't even want your confession." She turned to the grand piano, her fingers brushing the ivory keys. "I want the stage. I want the truth spoken through every note I play. And I want the world to finally know whose voice it was all along." Lucerne nodded. "Then do it. I'll sign anything. I'll admit everything." Ariana met his eyes. "You'll do it on record. Publicly. Before I play next week." "I will." She took the flash drive, turned her back to him, and walked out of the room without another word. Outside, Marco waited on the steps of the music verein, watching snow fall like feathers from the sky. "Well?" he asked. Ariana slipped the flash drive into her coat pocket. "He's dying." Marco frowned. "Does that change anything?" "No," she stared up at the sky. "But it means I won't waste time on hate." She didn't say it out loud, but she didn't need to, because now her revenge would come with standing ovations, with lights, with truth. And Lucien Revel would die watching the world love a woman he tried to erase. Chapter 4. The Stage of Reckoning. Vienna, Konzerthaus, 1 week later. The murmurs in the concert hall were a living thing, whispers of anticipation rising like the rustle of wings before flight. The Konzerthaus glittered under the golden chandeliers, its vast hall filled to the brim. Critics, patrons, students, and ghosts alike had gathered. Not for Lucien Revel. Not this time. Tonight was Ariana's night. Backstage, her reflection stared back at her, poised in a black floor-length gown with a low-cut back, her hair swept up like a crown. Calm, controlled, untouchable. But inside, something stormed. "I've seen queens with less presence," Marco said as he handed her a velvet pouch. Inside it was a simple silver pendant, her mother's. A talisman of all the pain she'd endured. She met his eyes in the mirror. "Is he here?" Marco nodded. "Front row. Looking like a man about to be tried for murder." Ariana gave a tight smile. "He's not wrong." Marco's expression turned serious. "The recording's live. The press release with his confession is scheduled to go out exactly as you begin your first note. She nodded once. Then let's begin. The moment she stepped onto the stage, silence fell. A breathless hush, as if the walls of the concerthalls themselves remembered her story and held their breath for its resolution. She didn't acknowledge Lucien in the front row, though she felt his gaze burning. She didn't look at the cameras or the critics. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and began. The first piece was her own, the one Lucien had stolen, twisted, claimed. But now in her hands, it returned home. The melody bloomed with sorrow and rage, love and devastation, every note a blade and a bomb. It wasn't just music. It was testimony. It was war. It was resurrection. As the final chord hung in the air, there was no applause yet, only stunned silence. Then Ariana stood, lifted her chin, and turned to the audience. "My name," she said, voice steady, clear, amplified through the hall, "is Ariana Melline. And that piece, Ashes of a Promise, was written by me 6 years ago. Tonight, its story returns to its rightful voice." A murmur rippled through the crowd. She continued. "Moments ago, you received a press release from Lucien Revel, publicly acknowledging his theft of this composition. This is not revenge. This is truth. And truth is what I offer you tonight." She didn't stay to see Lucien's face. She turned back to the piano and began Schubert Impromptu in G-flat major, her fingers like silk on the keys, her soul flowing freely now that the weight had been lifted. And the audience? They wept. They rose. They roared. Backstage, after the final encore, Ariana sat alone with her hands in her lap. Her phone buzzed with hundreds of messages, offers, congratulations, headlines screaming her name. But it was the knock on the dressing room door that stilled her. Lucien entered slowly, his face pale, his once proud shoulders sunken. "I meant what I wrote," he said. "I'm sorry." She studied him in silence. "You'll be remembered for this," she said at last. "For stealing, yes, but also for telling the truth." Lucien gave a broken laugh. "You really are stronger than me." "No," she said softly. "Just less cruel." He nodded and turned to leave. But at the door he paused. "That piece you played, it's still the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." "Of course it is," she replied. "It came from real pain." And then he was gone. That night, Ariana walked the streets of Vienna in her gown, heels in hand, snow melting on her shoulders. The city had never looked more alive. She was free, not just of Lucien, but of the silence that had once drowned her. And in that quiet snowfall, she whispered to the sky, to the ghost of her younger self. "We survived." We sang. And the world listened. Chapter 5. Letters Never Sent. Paris. Left bank. Spring rain. The apartment overlooked Rue Bonaparte, where the rain fell in soft sheets and cafes glowed with amber light. It was the kind of afternoon that begged for quiet, but Ariana could find none. She stood by the window, fingers resting on the sill, eyes fixed on nothing. Behind her, the room was filled with half-packed boxes. Sheet music, books, the scattered fragments of a life she hadn't quite decided to stay in or leave behind. The concert in Vienna had changed everything. Her name now opened doors that once slammed shut. Invitations flooded in Carnegie Hall, Berlin, Tokyo. Her old professors wrote her with trembling apologies. Labels fought to represent her. The world had woken up. But with truth came emptiness. For so long, her revenge had been her purpose. Now that it had been served, what was left? Marco had called it healing. Ariana called it silence. She reached for a shoebox tucked beneath the piano bench. It was old, worn, kept hidden all these years. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to her brother. All never sent. She picked up one, yellowed at the edges. "Dorian. They think I'm weak. That I've given up. But you'd laugh, you always said I was too proud to die quietly. It's been 3 months since they took the piece. 3 months since I was called unstable and emotional instead of talented. But I remember what you told me, burn clean, never small. She folded the letter and set it aside, then picked another. Dorian. Lucerne was the one who delivered the news, so kind, so soft-spoken. Said it wasn't his choice, that the label was pulling out. I believed him. Like a fool. You would have known better. You always saw through charm. And another. Dorian. I saw him on TV. Smiling. Accepting awards for our blood and years. I almost threw the glass. But I didn't. You'd have said, let him climb. It's a longer fall from the top. Tears blurred the words. Not for Lucerne. Not anymore. For Dorian. He died 2 years before the scandal, a car crash in Rome. Her protector. Her anchor. The one person who never let her drown in shadows. After his death, Lucerne had slithered into the void, promising safety. She hadn't just lost her music. She'd lost Dorian twice. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Marco stepped in, his usual flair subdued, carrying a small, wrapped package. You've got a delivery from a Clements. Came with this. He handed her a note. Ariana opened it slowly. Dear Miss Meline. My grandfather passed away last night. Among his things, we found this package labeled for you. He said it was meant for when truth meets peace. I believe it's time. With sympathy. Clemence Ravel. Her chest tightened. Lucerne. Gone. The package was a slim leather notebook. Inside was a letter written in Lucerne's familiar hand. Ariana. Asterisk, if you're reading this, then I've already vanished from the world, as quietly as I once crept into your life. I won't ask for forgiveness. But I hope you'll understand this. I loved your music. Desperately. And I couldn't bear that the world might never hear it because the world wasn't yet ready for a woman's voice, let alone one so fierce, so bright. So I took it. And I lost you. But I never stopped listening. Every time I played it, it was you I heard. I hope this notebook will help return what I stole. There are pages of unfinished work, ideas you spoke aloud while you thought I wasn't listening. They were yours. They always were. Asterisk. LR. Ariana closed the notebook, her throat thick. She wanted to scream, to throw it across the room. Instead, she placed it gently on the piano. She sat and began to write again. Not from anger, not for revenge, but for herself, for Dorian, for the girl she used to be, and maybe, just maybe, for the man who finally told the truth too late. Outside, the rain kept falling. But for the first time in years, it sounded like a song waiting to be born. Chapter 6. The Sound of Forgiveness. Florence. Villa Fiorenza. 2 months later. The villa stood on a hill, overlooking the Arno River as it shimmered beneath the Tuscan sun. Rows of cypress trees lined the winding path leading up to the estate. It was a place for retreat, not display. The kind of silence here was different from Vienna or Paris, it breathed. Ariana had come alone. She brought only a small suitcase, her notebook, and Dorian's pendant, which now rested against her chest like a heartbeat. For the first week, she didn't touch the piano. Instead, she walked. She wandered through the olive groves at dawn, listened to birdsong by the crumbling fountain, and sat beneath the lemon trees with her notebook open, though the pages remained blank. Healing, it turned out, had no tempo. It did not begin with a grand overture, but with stillness. One afternoon, while exploring the villa's unused west wing, she found a room with tall windows and a sun-bleached grand piano, half covered in a white sheet like a ghost waiting to be remembered. She pulled the cloth away slowly. Dust rose like memory. When she pressed a single key, the note rang out imperfectly, aged, honest, beautiful. That evening, she returned with a pencil behind her ear and Lucerne's notebook in hand. And for the first time in years, she began to compose without purpose. No gallery, no jury, no vengeance. Only music. On the 10th day, Marco called. The world misses you. Every pianist in Europe is trying to claim your empty seat. Let them try, she said, half laughing. I'm not racing anymore. You don't have to run, Ari. But you can still lead. His words stayed with her. That night, she sat beneath the stars, scribbling on a napkin beside an empty wine glass. She began humming an unfamiliar melody, soft, haunting, light and sharp in places like broken glass catching the sun. She didn't know where it came from, until she realized. It was Dorian's laugh, Lucien's last words, her mother's lullabies, the silence in Vienna, the apology in Paris. Everything. It was hers. 2 weeks later, the piece was finished. She titled it The Sound of Forgiveness. Ariana sent it privately to a single friend at the Conservatoire in Berlin. No press, she wrote. No billing. Just play it. Let them hear it without knowing it's mine. When the performance aired on a modest academic livestream, it sent ripples through the music world. Viewers scrambled to identify the composer. No one could trace it. A week later, it went viral. Critics described it as a haunting reconciliation of pain and peace, a masterwork born of fire, but composed in light. Ariana watched from the safety of her villa. No interviews. No stage. Just music. And yet, something within her stirred. A note unfinished. A letter unsent. On her final night in Florence, she returned to the West Wing and sat at the sun-drenched piano. She played Ashes of a Promise again, slower this time, like a letter to herself. She no longer trembled, no longer burned. When she finished, she whispered into the room, "I forgive you." To Lucien, to the people who doubted her, to herself. Then she stood, kissed Dorian's pendant, and walked into the night air, where stars blinked like old friends and silence, at last, felt like peace. Chapter 7. When the Past Writes Back. Berlin, Autumn's Edge, 1 month later. The train hissed to a stop at Berlin Hauptbahnhof, and Ariana stepped onto the platform with her violin case slung over one shoulder and her coat collar turned up against the sharp October wind. The city smelled of roasted chestnuts and cold iron, the scent of old wars and older music. Berlin had always been Lucien's city. Now it was hers. She wasn't here for applause. She was here to reclaim her own memory. The Conservatoire d'Armes, a nickname students used half in jest, half in reverence, had invited her to hold a private workshop on emotion and composition. It was a diplomatic term. What they wanted was scandal, a glimpse of the woman who had been stolen from and had risen like a storm. But Ariana had come for someone else. Her fingers clutched a letter she hadn't opened. Not until now. She had found it wedged inside the last page of Lucien's notebook. Hidden. Ari, there's one thing I never told you, something I feared you'd never believe. But Dorian, he knew. Long before you did. About the academy. About the theft. He suspected me. I told him I loved you, and he laughed. Not because he doubted it, but because he said, "Then prove it. Let her burn you if you lie." He never lived to see if I did. But now that you've read this, I guess you already have. Lucien. She sat in the cold station cafe long after the crowd had thinned, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. Dorian had known, and he hadn't told her. Maybe he believed she'd have to find the truth on her own. Or maybe he'd hoped Lucien might change before she found out. In either case, it no longer mattered. The past wasn't a page to be burned. It was a book to be closed gently, spine cracked, memory intact. Ariana left the letter on the cafe table under an empty glass and walked out into the city. The Conservatoire building still stood like a stone relic, sharp-angled, proud, and full of ghosts. A few faculty members greeted her in hushed awe. She walked through the familiar corridors, where she once played until her hands bled, where she first performed Dorian's forgotten compositions under a pseudonym, where Lucien had kissed her in secret and betrayal had begun with a soft touch. Now she passed the doors with her head high. She entered the hall, empty save for a single person seated at the grand piano, warming up gently with a Chopin prelude. It was Julian Merrick, the prodigy who had once been groomed to replace her, praised as the new voice of the conservatoire after she vanished. He looked up, startled. "Ariana Meline," he murmured. "I didn't expect you to actually come." "I didn't expect to be invited," she replied evenly. He stood, awkward but sincere. "They say you're legend now. But I never believed the stories. I studied your pieces, your early ones, and the ones you ghost wrote. You knew. I knew someone else had written Les Cendres d'une Promesse." His eyes softened. No man could have composed something that honest about grief and rage. It had to be a woman. It had to be you. There was a long pause between them. A silent duet of respect. "I'm not here to fight," Ariana said. "I'm here to listen. If you'll play." He nodded, sat, and began again. This time, not Chopin. Something else. Something haunting and unfinished. She recognized the motif. It was hers, a fragment she'd once hummed absently in a late-night practice session years ago. Julian had remembered. When he finished, he turned to her and asked, "Will you teach me the rest?" And in that question, she felt it. The past no longer hunted her. It asked to be heard. She nodded. "Yes, but we'll write it together." That night, she stayed in a modest Berlin apartment overlooking the Spree. She wrote late into the hours, sending notes back to Marco, to Clemens, to the Philharmonie. One by one, the letters were no longer about revenge. They were about rebuilding. When the final note dried on the page, she realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was creating again. Not from ash, but from light. Chapter 8. Echoes in the Rain. Paris, winter returns. The city of lights had grown colder since she left it behind. Snow fell like silent forgiveness over the Seine, coating rooftops and erasing the sharpness of memory. Ariana stepped onto Rue de Varenne in boots that had known Vienna, Florence, and Berlin. Now they returned to the place where everything had ended and maybe where something else could begin. Her destination was discreet, an art gallery tucked behind iron gates, curated by a quiet man named Émile, once Dorian's closest confidant. She hadn't seen Émile since the funeral. Inside, the gallery was dim and still. White walls carried the burden of beautiful things, sculptures, oil paintings, and in the corner, a lone grand piano, its lid closed like a casket. Émile stood beside it, older now, more tired in the eyes. "You came," he said, voice hoarse. "After all this time," Ariana nodded. "I owe him this." Émile gestured toward a canvas draped in silk. "He painted you, you know. The last month. Every night. Said if he couldn't make music with you, he'd trap light instead." Ariana's breath caught. Émile lifted the silk. The portrait was raw. Not a flattered version of her, but the truth of her, eyes shadowed with grief, lips set with fire, hair pulled back like she was ready for war. Behind her, abstract strokes of a burning violin, and over her heart, a faint sketch of a crumpled letter. Lucien's letter. A sob climbed her throat. "I didn't know she whispered, but Émile raised a hand. "He did," he said. "More than he ever told you." Ariana turned to the piano. She lifted the lid and ran her fingers along the keys, whispering the names of pieces they once played, the ones they never finished. She sat and began to play his melody, the one he left in pieces on old sheets, half-written in ink and desperation. She played it slowly, filling in the blanks with her own notes. Halfway through, her fingers stopped. Because someone else was playing it too. She turned. And there he stood. Dorian. Alive. Older. Leaner. A scar down his jaw now. But his eyes, those same storm-colored eyes, had not changed. She stood. The silence between them was thunderous. "How?" she breathed. "I faked it," he said quietly. "Lucien helped me disappear. He said it was the only way you'd ever be free. That if I stayed, you'd never stop chasing revenge." She stepped back, pain and fury rising in waves. You let me grieve you. Let me destroy myself. I know, he said, voice breaking. But I had to. Lucerne was dying. He wanted to atone. This was his plan. She shook her head. You were my anchor. And then you became a ghost. I had to resurrect myself alone. I know, he repeated, closer now. But look at you. You did. You survived every betrayal. Every silence. And you didn't just survive, you created. Ariana's fists trembled. And then, her shoulders fell. Because the truth was unbearable, but it was done. The worst had already happened. And she was still standing. I hate you, she whispered. I deserve it, he said. And then she collapsed into his arms. He caught her like he always had, hands trembling, heart pounding against hers. The kiss was not sweet. It was bitter, messy, full of pain and forgiveness and everything unsaid. Outside, the snow turned to rain. And for the first time in years, Ariana cried not from grief, but from release. That night, they walked along the Seine. She told him everything, the Florence villa, the conservatoire, Julien Merrick. He listened like a man relearning his favorite song. They made no promises. Only this. Next time, she said, don't disappear. Next time, he replied, I stay. Chapter 9, Where Music Remembers. Vienna, spring's first breath. The Musikverein stood tall against the thawing Vienna sky, its golden hall waiting like a cathedral of echoes. Inside, the grand rehearsal for the spring gala was in full swing, the final notes of a Rachmaninoff concerto trembling in the air. Ariana stood at the edge of the stage, her fingers grazing the polished wood of the conductor's podium. She had returned not as a performer, but as the gala's featured composer, the first woman in 30 years to hold the honor. But tonight wasn't about accolades. Tonight was about closure. Behind her, the orchestra hushed as Dorian entered the hall. No longer a ghost. No longer her secret. The room stirred. Whispers followed him like ripples. Many had believed he was dead. Some had even composed memorials in his name. Ariana watched as he climbed the stairs to the stage and stood beside her. His suit was black, simple, but his presence filled the space like thunder held in check. She turned to the orchestra and lifted her hand. From the top, she said, Ashes of a promise, final movement. Let's begin. The opening notes were gentle, a melody born from grief, shaped by fire. It built slowly, harmonies rising like a second chance. Strings wept. Woodwinds mourned. Then came the heartbeat of the piece, a passage that Dorian had once called impossible to play without honesty. He sat at the piano. And he played it. The notes bled from his fingers, aching, deliberate, desperate to be understood. Ariana stood behind him, baton still in her hand, but she no longer needed to conduct. The music carried itself. As the final chords echoed into silence, the room remained breathless. Ariana turned to face the orchestra. No words, just tears. The first violinist rose. Then the cellist. Then, one by one, every musician stood, not in applause but in reverence. The ghosts were still here, yes. But so was she. Later that evening, they sat on the rooftop of the Belvedere Palace, overlooking the glittering city. Ariana poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Dorian. I still don't forgive you, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. I still don't forgive myself, he replied. But I love you, she added, voice quiet. He looked at her. Enough to start again? She hesitated, then nodded. No promises. Only choices. And what's yours? Ariana leaned in, lips brushing his ear. To keep composing. But this time, not alone. That night, she dreamt of Florence, of Berlin, of Paris, cities where she had once lost parts of herself. But in the dream, those cities no longer held pain. They held music. She saw Lucerne, standing in the wings of a long-forgotten theater, smiling faintly. You kept the promise, he whispered. You burned the past, But you built something from the ashes. She woke with tears on her cheeks, Dorian's hand warm in hers. And, for the first time in years, the silence inside her was gone. There was only melody. Chapter 10. The Final Note. Florence, 1 year later. The old villa on the hillside no longer bore the shadows of grief. Spring had returned, bringing with it the heady scent of jasmine and the low hum of bees in the garden. Ivy crept along the stone walls like veins stitching the past back into place. Inside, the grand room that once held echoes of a funeral now shimmered with light. The piano had been restored, polished until it gleamed like obsidian. Framed scores lined the walls, ashes of a promise, the distance between silence and her newest, the final note. Ariana stood at the center, barefoot on cool tile, watching the breeze flutter the white curtains. Her hair was longer now, streaked with sun. Her heart, once a battlefield, had grown quiet. Dorian entered, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, ink stains on his fingers. "They're here," he said softly. "Already," she blinked. "I thought we had another hour." They came early. Emile, Julian, the students from the conservatoire, even Sophia. "They're in the garden." She took a breath. "And the foundation?" Dorian handed her the letter, thick with embossed parchment. "The Ariana Levant Foundation for Healing Through Music. Approved. Endowed. Alive." He kissed her forehead. "You built it." "We built it," she corrected, her voice steady. In the garden, rows of chairs faced a small wooden stage beneath olive trees. It was simple, intimate, just like they wanted. Ariana stood before the guests, sunlight tracing a halo across her shoulders. "I never thought music would save me," she began. "For a long time, I used it like armor, cold, distant, controlled. But music isn't about control. It's about surrender. And sometimes, it's about survival." She looked at Dorian. "I was betrayed. I lost everything. I thought revenge would heal me. It didn't. Love did. And not the kind that demands sacrifice. The kind that stays. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She turned to the crowd. "So this place is not just a house. It's not just a school. It's a sanctuary for those who've known grief, silence, violence, and still believe in beauty." Applause broke, warm and human. That evening, as stars rose over Florence, Ariana sat at the piano. She played the final note. It was not tragic. It was not triumphant. It was honest. Dorian joined her for the last bars. Their hands moved in perfect sync, not reaching for perfection, but presence. When they finished, the silence that followed was not empty. It was peace. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Ariana Levant Foundation had 5 satellite programs across Europe. Survivors came to study, to rest, to rebuild. Ariana taught composition and emotion in equal measure. Dorian wrote again music, yes, but also letters. To Lucien's mother. To the young musicians who once worshipped him. To himself. They never married. They didn't need to. But every spring, on the anniversary of Ashes of a Promise, they performed together under the same olive trees. And the world, bruised though it was, listened. Because from pain, something beautiful had bloomed. A second chance. A final note. A home. Ariana sat in a small cafe by Lake Lucerne, her notebook open in front of her, but her pen hadn't moved. Today was Lucien's birthday. She didn't cry on this day anymore. But her heart still carried an empty corner. Not painful, just a quiet space, like the soft pause after a final chord. She wrote, "Lucien. Today is sunny here, but the wind still holds the chill that makes people remember. You once said Switzerland always smelled like melting snow mixed with hot coffee. Today it really does. Dorian is preparing for a performance in Zurich. I didn't go with him this time. I needed to be alone. To remember you. Not to hurt, but to thank you. Because without you, I wouldn't have made it to the end. And I wouldn't be strong enough to forgive. You don't need to know this, but I forgave myself." She closed the notebook. Not to send. No need to. A girl who carried music. As dusk settled, Ariana walked toward the train station and spotted a little girl around 8 years old playing the violin on the street. Her open case held a few coins. What made Ariana stop wasn't the technique, but the girl's expression. Eyes closed tight, she played as if the only world that existed was the one made by her music. Ariana knelt down gently. You really love playing, don't you? The girl nodded. My dad used to be a musician. But he's not here anymore. Ariana smiled. In her bag was a trial print of a new piece from the foundation. I have a gift, she said, handing the girl a copy of The Distance Between Silence, a solo written for someone who hadn't spoken for 2 years. Would you like to learn? She asked. The girl nodded. Her eyes lit up like spring returning. A Gentle Prelude of Peace. That night, Ariana sat in the hotel room. Dorian returned late, tired but glowing. That little girl's going to be a wonderful violinist, Ariana said as Dorian took off his coat. Which girl? The one playing near the station. You're building futures for strangers again, he teased, pouring 2 glasses of wine. She's not a stranger, Ariana replied. My music recognized something in her. I'm just doing my part. Dorian sat beside her, brushing his fingers lightly over hers. I used to think you were a sad sonata, he said. But you're a full symphony, unfinished. Ariana laughed. Then you'd better write me a beautiful final movement. No, he replied, leaning closer. I just want to play it with you, until the very last note. Outside the window, snow began to fall. And somewhere down the street, the sound of a violin floated through the night, not perfect, but warm enough to make the world feel a little softer.